because there's such a creative part of being the printer, did it feel like a job?
At the end of the day, some days it felt like a job. The good times were the collaborating times, meeting the artist, working with the artist, all of that. The times when it felt like work were when you were working with, let's say, a 3 by 5 foot collograph plate for Jim Dine, and it's cut with a chainsaw, and the ink is 1/4 of an inch thick in places, and you're struggling to wipe it. And you do that X number of times during the day. At times it became a job, but every print you felt an accomplishment, so it was a reward. Unless you screwed up or a really bad one, you knew you were where you should be.
Hi, welcome to Platemark. My name is Ann Schaefer, and I am your host. Today's episode is with Bill Hall, who was a printer for Pace Prints and Editions for almost 30 years, and he got to work with some of the best printmakers from the last, 30 years, including Jim Dine, Chuck Close, Helen Frankenthaler before she died in 2011, and the list goes on and on. Thank you for finding us. Tell a friend about us. It helps us to get the word out if you share. That's my call to action for you. Tell a friend. Before I get rolling, I'd like to establish my positionality, as I have done in other Platemark episodes. I identify as a cis-het white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record this in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Now, back to Bill. Bill's an artist too. I think a lot of printers are, although not every printer. And you might be interested to know that he has gotten finally, after years of printing for other people, back to his own work. So you can find his work at the gallery that represents him in Asheville, North Carolina, where he now lives with his wife, Sarah, Momentum Gallery. Their website is momentumgallery.com. As we go through our talk together, Bill refers to lots of things that he worked on for Pace, and I'm going to include those images in the show notes over at platemarkpodcast.com. And also, if you're watching this on the video version, included within the video. And if you haven't found our video channel yet over on YouTube, it is there. I think you can just search for Platemark Podcast and it ought to come up. Okay, I think that's all the housekeeping. Let us get started. Today, I'm really happy to welcome Bill Hall to the podcast. It's great to see you, and I'm looking forward to our talk. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for asking me.
The whole series is talking to people that occupy the print quote-unquote ecosystem, and the whole point is to try and share with people what the different roles are in producing all of these wonderful works of art that are accessible to more people because there's multiples and they're lower priced and, all of that stuff. So it's really we're trying to talk to as many people that hold those different kind of roles, including master printers like you. So that's the whole goal.
I think it's a good opportunity to inform people, and hopefully we are getting people other than other print enthusiasts and print makers, just some people who don't know what goes on in our business. So we'll try to inform.
Yeah, it's always been my thing. Like I feel like I've talked about this many a time, that there's this speed bump that we have to get people over, the sort of technical understanding of, oh my God, what's an etching and what's a, engraving, or whatever the questions are that they don't feel sure about. And once we get them over, there's so many people that go into the making of the thing that they see at the fairs. You worked for a very, very, very long time at Pace Prints in New York City as a master printer. And Pace, for people who don't know, is a really big and important print producing workshop that's attached to the Pace Gallery system, which is even bigger. But your role there was as a master printer, which means what? Can you tell folks what that really means?
The word master has always thrown me. I don't
know how
to explain it. There's no universal system for determining what has allowed you to award yourself with that term. And I refused to use it for many years. And eventually I gave up when I saw that a lot of people who, had been doing it for a year or two were calling themselves masters. It's okay with me. So I decided, okay, I'll be one too. But basically, I think it's the idea that you have some extensive history of working with other artists and producing limited edition fine art prints. I suppose it's useful. A lot of times it may be just the person who is a director of a shop and the others would be assistant printers of some sort. So there's nothing official or formal or anything of that sort connected to it, as far as I know. I think it may also relate to Tamarind, which does have, quote unquote, a master print program. And maybe it started there. I don't know of any other institution that offers that kind of designation.
I know. I wonder how far back the term goes, honestly. That's a good question. I'll have to go do some digging. When that term master printer started being used.
It would be interesting to know. Yeah.
Yeah. And, the other thing about the term, master printer is the whole sort of gender part of it, which has become problematic in PC land,
Right. A mistress printer. I don't know.
Exactly. It sounds weird.
Yeah. It's, printer.
Right.
Works.
I know. I did notice in the things that you have written or quotes that people have put in articles about you, you've never used the term master printer. You've always said, I'm a printer from, that place or whatever. So I appreciate that.
I did add it to a resume a few years ago. I gave up.
I also think that you are fairly introverted. And I mean, even though you're an artist, which takes a certain amount of, self-assurance and ego to put yourself out there in terms of your own work, but that you as a master printer were always in that. I felt like it wasn't that you weren't sure of what you were doing, but you have this very understudied way of approaching people. You're very quiet and introverted, I would guess. And you absolutely want to make everything work for people and have them make the best work, but that you were always happy to be a little bit step back from the limelight.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I think in a way that's an important characteristic for someone working with artists. And the greater the reputation the artist has, it's even more important. Jim Dine would be an example of that. He has said how the thing that bothers him the most, or what he hates the most, is for the printer to be artists themselves and to assert themselves, and in that way. And I'm not being critical of Jim for that, because he was a really fine individual. I enjoyed working with him and have always appreciated his artwork. The other comment I would make about that is I didn't know even what being a printer was. And I think the first revelation was after graduating. I wanted to teach art, frankly. But I got a job in Galveston, Texas, which was sort of the end of the earth in certain ways. I don't mean that to offend Galveston people. It was a very unique kind of little spot in the map. Catherine Brown came to the College of the Mainland, which was between Galveston and Houston, still is, and she gave a presentation, and she showed some slides of a number of artists she was working with, and talked about how her press operated and what that was all about. And I think I had it in the back of my mind from that point that would be a good thing to do, but never thought that I would do it, and certainly not working at the level, at pace. I was very fortunate to get that job, I think. It was a great experience. I think one needs to set aside their ego to work effectively with any artist.
But I think, with Jim, he always knew what he wanted, or I assume, knowing Jim, that he always knew what he wanted. But and I think that is also an indicator of the caliber and level of artists that Pace was working with, that that they're at a certain point in their careers where, they're like, I need you to help me do this thing, but I know what I want. Where some more younger emerging shops probably are helping people figure out, what's possible and what it can be used to say. So, I mean, there's sort of these different strata of the role, really, right?
Mm-hmm. Actually, when I first started at Pace, there was a different term for those younger artists who came to work with us, and that was that they were working for the Spring Street Workshop. And that set a hierarchy because they were not directly being published by Pace Prints or Pace Editions. So we did have the experience of working with younger people who maybe hadn't done prints before, but who were gaining a reputation with their original artwork. And at the same time, working with people like Dine and Close.
So the Spring Street, was it like a different label, but you were still using the same shop and the same people?
Name only.
Oh, interesting. I don't think I knew that. Huh.
Well, good. You learned something today.
I did. I don't know it all really, Bill, I promise. So one of the things I like to ask people is, when did it first, when did art seem like a thing that you were good at and wanted to pursue? And also, when did the print thing finally kind of land in your brain as that's the thing I want to go, that's the road I want to go down?
Art in general, I think like a lot of people, I hit art because I had some talent at it. And what that usually means is you could draw someone's picture and make it look like them. That was my first inclination about art. And I didn't have that kind of talent or inclination for any other field. So when I went to college, I went to the art department. I was with the idea when I first went into it of being a quote unquote commercial artist, term not even used anymore. Before I left college, I wanted to be a painter and teach fine art, college level.
And that was in Alabama, right?
That was at the University of Alabama. And I took my first printmaking class there with Richard Zellner, who taught the printmaking classes. I liked that manner of working. It felt very comfortable. I liked the indirect qualities of making a matrix and then printing it and it reversed. To have a brush and paint in my hand was always intimidating, but somehow making a print, making this matrix, it was like that in-between step, which allowed me to appreciate accident. To this day is something that's very important to the work I do, my own work. So it began in college, but like I said, I wanted to teach printmaking, and I have had the opportunity at a little small level to do some of that. I guess when I moved to New York, I didn't know where that was going to land, but I didn't think it was going to be teaching, although I did teach at the College of Staten Island one time. But the notion of being a printer who worked in the field, helping other artists make prints, it really developed at Robert Blackburn's printmaking workshop. And I thought, hey, this is it. From then on, I was pursuing that as a goal. I was a little older than most people who got into something. I was, 35. I mean, I wish I had started earlier, or wish I'd gone to New York earlier, perhaps, or to someplace like New York, where I had that kind of opportunity, but it didn't happen.
But how did you know that Blackburn was a place to, I mean, you went to UT Austin for graduate school, and then you were like, hey, maybe I should go try New York? I mean, moving to New York from Texas is kind of that's a move.
Galveston didn't have a lot of promise. I was teaching at the community college there and with the Galveston County Cultural Arts Center. I just was thinking, this is dead end and I've got to do something, and there's nothing holding me back. I had been to New York a couple of times. I liked what I saw. I was, it's an impressive place to be in, especially in art.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, I'm going. And I did. And as far as Bob's shop, I had never heard of it, the printmaking workshop. I saw a little ad I was looking for something, some work to support myself. But I saw an ad in the Village Voice. for the Robert Blackburn printmaking workshop classes and editioning or whatever. So I made a cold call and asked if I could come by and show my work, and I didn't know how they operated or what. So I made an appointment. I go and I meet Bob, this wonderful, wonderful character who was extremely welcoming, brought me in, gathered people around, who were busy with their own things. Says, well, because I had my portfolio, I pulled it out, and not that it was that good. I guess he saw some promise, and he knew that I was looking for something to be busy with, something to make a little money. So he hired me to be the night manager. It was interesting. He had immediately some sort of faith or confidence that maybe I would work in. Night manager, meaning Bob would leave for the evening and I would stay there till midnight and oversee, I guess, the cleanup of the shop so that the next morning it was clean. We had interns, or people anyway, who helped with that. Then I started with Marjorie Dyke. She had come into the shop and gotten a job a couple of months before I got there. I don't remember offhand how I worked myself into the printer role, but within a few weeks, I guess Marjorie had more work than she could do or something, and she tried me out or whatever. So I was then coming in during, at 9 in the morning, and I would be there till midnight. That was my first experience. I printed initially, I guess, on some Lucio Pazzi prints, and then I worked with people who remained friends of mine for a long time, artists, Chris Giannakis being the primary one. We did prints all the way up till I retired. Outside of Pace, I would work on editions. We did about 70 editions together over the years. So the printmaking workshop was a magical place, and anybody who's ever been there will tell you the same thing. And Bob himself was one of the most unusual people you'll meet, and one of the most generous and welcoming people you'll ever meet.
I never met Bob Blackburn, although, he didn't die until the 2000s, right? It was, not that long ago.
Right.
I kind of kick myself for not having gone over there and met him, just to pick his brain about the early history and how he worked with Hayter, because I'm a Hayter person, as everyone knows. Did I dream that he was living in the shop at some point? He wasn't very good with money, as I recall.
I think more than one period of time, he was without an apartment. In fact, when I started there was an area it was sort of an open studio, but there were twists and turns, and there was, as you got off the elevator, there was a little office where Robin Holder was working with Bob. Then there was, to the left, there was a room that was their collection area, flat files, the typical collection area. And he would sleep on the table in the collection area. He struggled. He did what he had to do to keep the shop open, and what they charged was very little. If you couldn't pay, he didn't bother you. He didn't kick you out. That's the way he was. So the Elizabeth Foundation, I think, has been a lot more successful with keeping things running. Actually, Robin Holder, who was his right-hand person, she did a lot to try to convince Bob that he needed to work the grant program a lot more than he was doing, and to turn over some of those responsibilities to someone else, which he refused to do. He didn't want to be removed from any part of the workshop, which is understandable. It's his baby. The only other thing that I could offer about the workshop is that there were artists there from all over the world, which, from a kid from Alabama, a grown kid, it was impressive. I had friends from Pakistan, from Asian countries, from different countries in Europe. The workshop was known around the world to some degree.
Listeners who aren't familiar with the Blackburn workshop may not know that Bob Blackburn was Black, and that he was pretty much the only Black owned and operated shop in the country for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think, the whole shop needs more. It needs to be better known, in my book. But I'm always amazed and curious to know what the mix of people in the shop was, like international, but also there had to have been Black artists there, right?
Oh yes, one of the things I did for 2 years, they had what they call the third world portfolio, and a number of artists which he selected could participate and work with the printers. There were 3 printers, 4 actually at one time, and create this portfolio. And there are artists who now are getting attention, like Adrian Cowens and Stan Whitney. Faith Ringgold, she did some quilt-like works there. A lot of those artists are coming into their own, long overdue. And Bob was a really good printmaker, but I hardly ever saw him working on anything. A lithographer. His work it would look dated now if you looked at it, but it's really good. He was a good artist.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. When I was at the Baltimore Museum, we acquired 3 prints by Blackburn in one purchase. 2 were lithographs that were variations on each other. And then the last one was actually a woodcut, which was wonderful. But they're hard to find. Like, where are they all? Phil Sanders, who worked for the workshop for a long time, tells me that he just didn't produce that many, really, in the end.
Exhibition of his at the Ken Kaliba Gallery, I was surprised at the variety and the number of pieces that filled the gallery, because I really did never ever see him a few times, but I was there 4 years.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to me. Yeah, there was a show at the University of Maryland gallery, the David Driscoll gallery that Deborah Cullen did, that was also equally like, wow, who knew, you know? And also the other people that have a lot of his work is the Library of Congress. Catherine Blood was able to accumulate a whole group of Blackburn. So if visitors or listeners want to go see, you know, more than one at a time, the Library of Congress would be a great place to start. So after Blackburn, you decided to start your own press in Brooklyn, right?
In Greenpoint, yeah. It was me with a college friend of mine who had been teaching out in Iowa. And he decided to move to New York. We had known each other in graduate school. And he expressed some interest in doing a shop. And I thought that, well, neither of us had any money, so how are we going to do this? At the end, we coughed up $5,000 each, I think it was. And we found a place at the end of Greenpoint, northern end of Greenpoint, which was hard to get to. I mean, you had to go the L or to the G train. So it wasn't convenient for people in Manhattan. I was living in Sunnyside, Queens at the time, Sarah and I. We got married actually in 86, and the shop we opened in the fall of 86, and invited artists to come in and make prints on a basis of we would split the edition. I think we shared cost of the materials. So it was like a 50-50 thing, and they could take their prints and do what they could, and we would try to do what we could. We didn't sell many prints. And we did some contract work, but it basically wasn't working out. So at the beginning of 1988, Paul decided he wanted to do something else. So I bought him out, which means we divided up the equipment. He went on to teach out in New Mexico. Then I heard that Joe Wilfer was setting up a studio for Pace Editions. And this was when I was working with Stephen Antonakis, who had worked with Joe out at Madison, Wisconsin, where he went to school. Stephen said, you ought to check with Joe because he's doing this business with Pace. So I did and showed my work to Joe, what we'd been printing, and he tried to get us some jobs and wasn't very successful. But he gave me a call one day in the fall of 88 and said, we need someone here to work in the shipping department. And I thought, okay, sounds like a job, which is more than I had. So they hired me to be the shipper, building these crates, working a table saw, stuff I'd never done, but You have to do that sometimes. I was doing that for a while, and all the time, Joe was telling me, we're going to get you upstairs. The print studio was upstairs on the ninth floor. We were on the eighth floor with the registrar, with Dick Solomon's office, and little gallery and stuff. And Joe kept saying, we're going to get you on the ninth floor. We're going to get you on the ninth floor. Well, it was interesting. I'd see these artists come in like Chuck Close and Malcolm Morley. There were these big name artists, and I thought, wow, I'd really like to get up on the ninth floor. And eventually it did happen, but I worked as a registrar for a year before I was able to transition to the print studio. It was great. That was the beginning of, what I really like to think of when I think about my career as a printer. Although the Bob experience was unusual in a way and terrific. Didn't we got paid by the prints we pulled. I'd get maybe per print, I'd maybe get $3, $4, $5. $5 was a lot of money to get. But he wasn't, and the artist would pay the bill, whatever it was. For maybe they'd get audition maybe for $100, and Dick would hand out a little bit to us.
Wait, that was a pay? So you were getting paid by the print?
No. That was at Bob. I would say
okay.
No. At Pace, I got a little more than that, and I got a salary.
Is the shop still in the same place as when you started in 1988?
No, that was 72 Spring Street.
Oh, okay.
Then we moved in 1998 to 18th Street, 144 West 18th Street, with a similar situation where one floor was inventory and shipping and those things, and the other floor was the print studio. There were, auditioning shops.
And they're still there on 18th Street.
Yeah, 144
right.
West 18th.
Because there's such a creative part of being the printer, did it feel like a job?
At the end of the day, some days it felt like a job. The good times were the collaborating times, meeting the artist, working with the artist, all of that. The times when it felt like work were when you were working with, let's say, a 3 by 5 foot collograph plate for Jim Dine, and it's cut with a chainsaw, and the ink is 1/4 of an inch thick in places, and you're struggling to wipe it. And you do that X number of times during the day, and at times it became a job. But, every print you felt an accomplishment, so it was a reward. Unless you screwed up or a really bad one, you knew you were where you should be.
The plates that Jim worked on with a chainsaw did. I would assume that there would be like lots of chunks and jagged parts that might break or wear down as you went through auditioning. How did you manage that?
When I'm talking about printing intaglio with a chainsaw, he was working on like a 1/4 of an inch Epsom board, which is kind of a layered cardboard. It was a technique he had picked up with Kurt Zine in Vienna, who had printed a lot with Jim. He exposed Jim to this manner of making his prints because Jim wanted something that was more painterly and more physical. And so he made some with Kurt, and then he brought them back, some of them, and we would audition, and then he started making them with us. But the chainsaw experience really developed in the relief area with Joe Wilfer and Ruth Lingen. The summer of 91, I believe it was, Dick had wanted to work with Jim for the longest kind of time. He already had Chuck Close coming to the shop, and Joe Wilfer was responsible for getting Chuck because he worked with Chuck through Dudonay before coming to Pace. But it was great having those two artists because they were bread and butter for a long time. With Jim, he likes to work with a lot of artists. A lot of printers. He definitely likes things his way. So, and you want to please him. That's what printers do. So he walks into the shop the first day, and I think it was the first thing they worked on, but he may have done a couple of things before that. But he tells Joe, get me a chainsaw. Of course, we discussed, how are we going to do this? You got clean paper, you've got, a shop that you have clean areas and dirty areas, but whatever, you don't have chips of wood flying all over the place. We did. Got him a chainsaw. And that summer of '91, he made some of the best work I think he's made. He and Joe and Ruth Lincoln, all relief printing. So you asked about the jagged areas. It wasn't such a big deal with rolling ink on, but still you had a lot to deal with.
He also likes accident and doesn't mind an addition that's not exactly one to the other, right? Like I acquired one of your prints, Raven on Lebanese Border, that Julia DeMario had done. That well, maybe you can tell me. I understood that the background was a relief block and that she used a really thin solventy ink that kind of splooshed out the sides. And, each one of them was completely different.
I think that was made when she and Ruth went with Jim to Israel and worked
Oh,
on
you're right. You're
at a
right.
kibbutz over there. Is
That's
that
right.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, you're right. You're right. Although I did buy it from you guys.
Yeah. We published. He is a very physical person with his artwork. Is obvious, and I love that, in a way, because I can't do that. I'm too. I'm more like Aldo Cromwell, which is another story, because I may as well go into that one. But I will say about, he was very complimentary with Julie and I, and what he said about our printing, because he liked the way we wiped the plates. And that's the reason, I guess, we had how many years of printing for him. And Julia is still working with him out in Walla Walla, Washington. The other polar opposite of Jim, dying in ways that they both extraordinary in what they do. Chromolink was the printer of something like 750 editions for Picasso in 63 to Picasso's death in 73. Aldo moved back to Paris after that and started working with other artists in the shop in Paris, and then came to New York to work with Pace at Jim's suggestion. Aldo had such a delicate touch on his aquatints, on the way he wiped plates, on everything he did, that it was just pristine. It was perfect. The beveling of the edges of his plates was an art.
Oh,
wow.
And
sometimes we would audition some things that he did. He never would correct you or anything, and he never really directly taught us anything. When I say we, it was Julia and I who worked in the etching area. But you knew what he wanted because you knew what he did. The shop was designed around him. When he came for 3-4 months at a time every year, we assisted him, and then we tried to keep going with other projects we were working on at the same time. But it was sort of, you take a back seat and watch what happens and learn from it. So anyway, the two of them, I'm sure you know the story. Maybe I've told you. But Jim went to Paris to work with Aldo. It was in the mid-'80s, I think. Let's say 84 or 5. And Aldo had been doing some things with Jasper Johns, for instance. So he was known on this side of the Atlantic. But Jim, they arranged the date to go into work. And Aldo had made these X number, I think there were 4 or 5 plates. And Aldo's told this story. Pretty good sized plates, let's say 30 by 36 or whatever. And he had them laying out. There were 5 plates, I believe he said, laying out on the counter in the basement where he was going to work in his shop in Paris, and had a concrete floor. And Jim walks in, and takes him down there to show what what he had ready for him, so he could just jump in and start working. Aldo looks at it, and he's proud of what he did. Jim looks at it and picks up a plate, turns it face down, and slides it across this concrete floor, and it gets all scratched up. He loved it. Aldo then had an inkling of what he was in store for working with Jim.
Right.
But, it was a marriage made in heaven. They became great friends. Although, according to Jim has called him Printer. He says you need to say no more about him, just the word Printer, because he was the epitome to Jim. Although Jim loved what other printers could do for him, Aldo was his favorite, I think, because of their close friendship.
I was just going to say that the relationship, you have if you don't get along personally, it's going to be a long
Mm.
road, right? Like, of course, you're going to work with people you like, right?
Well, as a printer, you don't get the best results from the artist. If you don't like them or their art, you can't show it. And, thankfully that rarely happened. So I never had that experience where I didn't want to do the best I could, of course.
Well, yeah, I have a hard time imagining you saying "screw that." That just doesn't seem like you.
I don't think I ever told an artist what they were doing was ugly. In fact, that may be a shortcoming. I think I could have asserted my thoughts more than I did. I may have been a little too reluctant sometimes, and I only did if what they were doing technically was not right. That they needed some help with that, or if they asked me. Sometime an artist, what do you think? And I would tell them what they thought nicely.
Right, of course. Yeah, I ask printers all that, excuse me, that all the time. Like how comfortable did you feel or do you feel suggesting that perhaps, puppies and sailboats isn't enough, And I've gotten a
Uh-huh.
variety of answers.
Yeah, I bet you have.
Yeah. Yeah. So Jim's an amazing, and he's, still at it at age what? 80
87,
something?
I think.
87. Yeah. He's I was telling you the other day when we were excuse me doing our prep talk, and that I had done a show at the Baltimore Museum of him because there was just enough in the collection that I was like, this could be a great small show. And the chief curator, Jay Fisher, was like, oh yeah, let's do it. But then it turned into more because Jim then gave the museum several prints, including the amazing and beautiful 5 hammer etudes, which I thought was
Hmm.
just the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And then he came down for this talk, and it was terrifying because he's so, he's just doesn't suffer fools lightly, I think would be a good way to put it. But the
Yeah.
best part about it was that was able to come up to New York to have lunch with him, and I met Dick Solomon and was
Hmm.
introduced to you, and that was the first time we met. And you pulled out some matrices for me, which was really wonderful to see. What what was what was your favorite project? Do you have one?
I not only have a favorite, and I was thinking about that before we started this, and I was thinking about, I have most innovative. I have several categories if you want to
Okay,
hear
well,
them.
let's do it.
Most innovative, most challenging, most fun collaborating, and then my favorite project.
All
Which
right,
one you
go.
want to hear first?
All of them.
Okay. Most innovative, Tara Donovan. When someone comes in and tells you they want to print rubber bands, what do you do? We had this vertical hydraulic press, and with her working together with Justin Israel, I remember him being mostly responsible for her projects. They devised a system to put these rubber bands on edge in different configurations, creating patterns, and they would stick to a matrix, and they could keep them down and glued tight enough so that then they could gently roll the surface of the rubber bands, put it on a piece of paper, and then with a hydraulic press with just the right amount of pressure, get a print. She did a number of those. The first etching project she did, she wanted to print bubbles. I don't know if you've seen those
Oh, I
prints,
love the
but
bubbles. Yeah,
yeah,
they're fabulous.
she was making ink drawings with bubbles on paper, and so she wanted to do that as a print project. So Julie and we mixed ferric chloride with some kids' bubbles, and she took the little ring thing and dipped it in and blew bubbles onto a plate which had a rosin aquatint ready to be etched for an aquatint. And the bubbles would sit there and break and create these bubble patterns. I think those prints with Tara were more off the wall. Tara went on, she printed broken glass and string and
The pins, right?
pinpoints.
Yeah, the pins.
Mm-hmm.
Those are
So
nuts.
that was a good one.
But the bubbles on
Mm-hmm.
the plate with the aqua tinted surface, the bubbles, it's almost like a spit bite. So there was acid in the solution and they
Right.
just sat there and etched away. Okay. Just want to
They
make
had
sure I'm
etched
getting it.
long enough to create surprisingly a relatively strong image, and certainly the identifiable bubble patterns or whatever.
Yeah, my colleague Rena Hoisington acquired one of the rubber band prints. I'll never forget it. It was early on in my tenure at the Baltimore Museum, and she brought this print in, and I was like, wait a minute, she's doing contemporary. In fact, that was the print that made me start paying attention to contemporary prints because I was dealing with the early 20th century American and the British and I
Uh-huh.
was back in history. And so I was like, wait, maybe I should start paying attention.
Yeah.
All right, next one.
Most challenging.
Okay.
Well, this is another one. Oh, first of all, this is another one. Yasu Shibata,
Oh,
working on, you know what the one thinking about? It's Chuck Close print he did, and it was 36 by 30 inches, which for a ukiyo-e style print is big. So Chuck had done this painting of his niece, I think, Emma. It was a big head, beautiful painting, and brought it into the shop. So here we are with this many $1,000 painting, and Yasu had to interpret it and make the print from this. As you know, the ukiyo-e method, it's the way you cut the blocks, and Yasu had, you know, a magic touch with all of that. To me, he was outstanding and is. So anyway, he went to Chuck's studio for 3 days in a row to see his color palette. Yasu would mix colors in Chuck's studio and then came back and started. And after a couple of starts, he realized he was going the wrong way. Anyway, it took a year and a half. It took Chuck something like 3 months, 2 or 3 months to do the painting. It took Yasu a year and a half to make the edition. And Yasu went on and did a number of other prints that like ukiyo-e method with Chuck. But I think that's the best. It's like 113 colors on 27 blocks, multiple
20 set.
colors on
Oh,
different blocks.
wow. That's a lot of colors on one block. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So that is one of the most challenging. There were two other Chuck Close prints that were most challenging. The scribble etching that he wanted to print 12 plates, that was pretty spectacular in terms of difficulty. We thought it was going to be that difficult, and it was, but it was doable. Where he drew with different colored pencils and soft ground etching in 12 plates, one on top of the other.
Right. Yeah.
Arturo Herrera, that was a pretty
Was that sort
interesting
of big city, the big cityscape that was sort of Disney like?
Well, what we did for him, he's done that could be something as you describe it, that he could have done that. But
Maybe I'm thinking of the wrong thing.
he sent us 3 collages that were 2.5 feet wide and 5 or 6 feet tall, three different size collages with dozens, maybe I think one of them had over 100 pieces, different elements on it. So the whole shop got involved with that, and we made these elements all intaglio methods and all kinds of relief methods, and then cut them and assembled them. But they turned out good, but it was a lot of work, a lot of time doing them.
Yeah, I don't know who
The
I was thinking of with the Disney reference. That was completely the wrong artist. So
Oh,
strike
okay.
that.
No, these were very abstract, very colorful. Although
Yeah.
he does or did in these images, he did have. You might be right because he did have some little cartoon characters. It was a little okay. It was a little bit of everything. Yeah,
I'm vindicted.
they weren't just color shapes.
Okay,
There was
good.
a lot of stuff in it.
But before we leave Chuck Close, the
Mhm.
BMA has a small self portrait that is spit bite with like timed, and it's a
Yeah.
grid.
Right.
And the grid is, we were always trying to figure out how in the world the grid got on there, because I think it's white with, like, each line is two black lines describing. Like, I don't know how you guys did that.
Each two black lines.
Well, I mean, like the grid lines were, if you looked really closely, it looked like it might be that the black was clinging to the canyon wall. You know what I mean?
Was it an etching?
Yeah, spit
Okay.
bite.
So Julie and I did 3 etchings with Chuck like that.
Oh, I love having the source. This is so cool.
Okay. He did one in this manner with Aldo. He did the first one with Aldo. And with Joe and Handmade Paper, they had worked out a system for doing these portraits with 24 different values of gray. So they would mix paper pulp and 24 different values of gray. They used a fluorescent light fixture, a plastic one that had a grid. You remember those old, like in office buildings?
Yes, yes.
They would couch a carrier sheet, lay that grid on top, and these individual numbers would have, our grids would have holes relating to like little ketchup bottles, squeegees. So that's how those were done. And that same technique, those 24 different values of gray, Aldo did test to put an aquatint on a plate. I mean, it work out how long to etch it to get a certain value with a spit bite technique using the brush with the ferric chloride. It was very successful. It was very nice. It was probably like so big, maybe
Yeah, it's not
12
big.
by 16 or something. It was fairly good size. A 1/4 inch grid. So a year later, Aldo was in Paris, and Chuck wanted to do one smaller with an 1/8 of an inch grid. So that's what Julia and I and Melissa Bartlett, I think, helped us, or Pam Cooper. Anyway, another printer. And the way we did it, it took 3 of us to do it. One person would apply the acid, another person was the timer, and the third person was the blotter. And we would do it row by row, one by one. The lightest area would be just a hit and blot, like that with the acid. The darkest sometimes would have to be etched a second time in certain really black ones, but initially they would be maybe 8 to 12 minutes, and you would hit them in between times and blot them, put some more acid on them. So doing that, of course, takes quite a while, and with an 1/8 of an inch, the grid itself you brought up was I drew it out on a light table, and then transferred it. I did it in soft ground with a ballpoint pen and lightly etched it. He just wanted to be able to see the grids. The one that Julia and I did, the three of us I mentioned worked on it together, and I applied the acid, and Julia timed because she was good at timing, and Melissa was a good blotter. So that's how we did that one. We came back and we did another one that was white ink on black, done the same way, but it was bigger. And it wasn't a self-portrait. It was the composer,
Philip Glass.
Phil. It was a Phil. Yeah.
I love the idea. Yeah, I love the idea of like the Dieudonné dealing with how many 27 shades of gray.
Mm-hmm.
How many? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that those color values equaling time.
Yeah.
When you got to the spit bite, and that correlation, like there's something you could play with those rules, and I don't know, that's really cool. I love that.
I'll tell you a failure story. After we did that 1/8 inch one, he wanted to do a fill. It would also be an 1/8 inch, but it was gridded so that there were like, with the self-portraits, there was like 1,720 something squares. With the fill, there were like 5,280. And Julia and I, with another person, went through and did this thing. If your acid is subject to perform differently according to humidity and temperature and such. So we did half of this print at one day, came back the next day and did the other half, proofed it, and you could slightly see a shift. Did that everything else right. And Chuck, we showed it to him. He wanted to see, and of course he couldn't accept that. And I tried about 3 times and for a year. I came back to it. It's like I didn't want to give up on it and tried to make it work and improved it a lot, but it didn't meet Chuck's standards, so he killed it. And I tell you, there's so much time involved in that wasted project, but it wasn't wasted. It was worth it, and I guess I learned some humility from that.
But what happens to all the proofs that you pulled during that time? Do they all just get ripped up and thrown in the trash?
Yes, unless some artists would take them and want to. Some artists would take them and want to draw on them or paint on them or something. But outside of the artist proofs and some printers proofs and the edition, I take that back. We would hold shop proofs for demonstration purposes. We would have student groups come in and we would show them work that way.
Gemini out in LA, they take the old, the cast-offs and make greeting cards out of them, or note cards to send to people. Yeah. An idea.
Well, we threw away a lot of stuff. What can I say?
I could just be like dumpster diving behind paste prints. What am I going to find today?
Yeah. The last challenging piece that I would mention is James Turrell. And that was next to the last print that I worked on. I don't know if you saw those, but they were oval-shaped aqua tints relating to his Guggenheim exhibition. And it was challenging to try to mix inks and print inks that would have some relationship or be believable as far as a light reflection. One thing we found out, we needed to mute things. So they were in different colors, but then there was always a white plate to kind of soften that effect. And I think we did about as well as could be done. They're not perfect, but they're not. Oh,
come on, Bill. They're gorgeous.
Well, thank you. I thought they were.
You're welcome. They're stunning. Oh my gosh. I just came across a short video that you and Sarah did about printing them, which was so cool and so helpful. I'll include a link to that on the show notes so people can go look at it.
After seeing that, you still wanted to interview me?
Oh my God.
The most fun collaborating was the summer of 2008 with Gada Amir and Reza Farkandeh. They worked together on a lot of things, and they came in just to, first of all, just kind of experiment, and then I think only one edition print came out of that summer. The rest were all monoprints. And the way they worked, it was just so much fun. They were so full of life, and it drew all the printers in, except maybe Yasu. Yasu had his own area, and you didn't bother Yasu when he was working. So sometimes I was sort of jealous of that he didn't have to be in the mix. But this was a great fun time for all of us because they were so warm and welcoming. They each had their own thing. She would do these figurative things, might be called soft ground porn, but they were very beautifully drawn women. And he would do floral or images of plants and such. But they would work back and forth. She would do something on the plate, and then he would take it and he would do something, we'd proof, and then it would keep going like that until they both were happy with it and signed off on it. But that was a great fun time because there was no pressure really, and we had a good time.
Well, so when you say no pressure, do you mean that there was no expectation from the office upstairs that we were going to get X done and we're going to have an edition of, 100 or whatever the number was? Like, is that what you mean? Or just because they were new to the shop and it was decided that you were just going to play with making? And I mean, how does that work?
It was because of their playful attitude. There was pressure coming from the floor below. Dick would come up occasionally and want to see what was going on and want to see results. And why are all of you working with her? And well, one final thing would be my favorite project. Helen Frankenthaler. It's one that I'm probably the most proud of. She worked with Yasu at Tyler Graphics and also did some prints with her at Pace. She sent over to us this 3-panel painting on plywood, which we were to turn into a print. So Yasu printed in the ukiyo-e style, the background brown or the look of wood. The rest had to do with 3 or 4 plates on each, and then pochoir and
Pochoir?
various colors. Huh?
Did you say
Pochoir?
pochoir?
Yeah.
Oh, can you explain that for our listeners? That's a term I've not used yet.
It's relatively simple. It's the direct application of ink to a print, to a finished print, using stencils. She had drips or whatever, little tiny areas of paint that she had painted on her plywood. And we printed sometimes things double because to make them more intense, we had to give them some extra punch in certain colors, some greens and some reds and some whites. And so we would take a stencil, trace these areas on top of her painting, cut them out, and using a stencil brush and a very fine amount of ink, and then dab it through the stencil, hole in the stencil. So that was done in quite a number of places, actually.
I pulled it up online. There looks like there's some orange dribbles there on the left panel, and but when you say dabbing, are you really just like sort of pouncing
Yeah.
in this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the best way. If you try to brush it, you might get it underneath your stencil.
And the rest of the larger areas of blocks of color are aqua tints.
They're all aqua tints. Mm-hmm.
Oh my heavens!
And the white is like this, probably the last thing she applied. I mean, it's like this veil that kind of covers. It goes thin, thick in places, and it's.
How'd you do that?
Well, as I said, a lot of plates, a lot of proofing, more colors. There were 3 or 4 colors on each plate, so you do it.
Oh my God, Bill, you're hilarious. You just do a little thin veil of white dripping down the copper plate.
But anyway, that was my favorite project, actually, because other printers were doing other things, and I basically had my own area to work on that. I found that in ways it was better to have the same hand in a lot of that anyway. So, and other things, we share sometimes, or usually there might be one printer out front, directing a project or being the go-to person, the liaison to the artist, or whatever you want to call it.
I was interviewing the 3 printers out at Tandem recently, and they talked about how interesting it would be to have each of the 3 of them do the same print for an artist and see how differently it would come out depending on your eye when mixing the inks and, however else you problem solved how to get the image onto whatever the matrices was.
Right.
Which would be totally cool to see that.
I think in terms of how to do it, I think there would probably be general agreement. Yeah, but I mean, some things just there's one way to do it that is for someone experienced in doing prints. They can see that pretty readily. Others, you need to talk it over and try to figure it out.
Well, and they indicated that was their favorite part. Like, they never said no to an artist, but then they would sequester themselves somewhere and go, how the heck are we going to do this thing? Which I thought was great.
We did that, yeah.
I'm sure. But like on this Frankenthaler, it's the Book of Clouds from 2007, just so everyone knows. I don't have it blown up to actual size, of course, and I can't see the texture of the aqua tint, which I love an aqua tint, so don't get me wrong. But I mean, it looks like that could have been a screen print in a way from where I'm sitting at this point.
Yeah. Pace didn't do screen prints. Never had a screen print facility. They would be contracted to VanDeb. Bob Blanton got some jobs in other places. The same with litho. We didn't do lithography. The artist coming in would know that, and even though it looked like it would be a lithograph, we turned it into an aqua tint anytime we could. And if it had to be a lithograph, we would send it somewhere else.
Well, who was printing lithos for you?
I don't know because I mean that was so rare. I think Ruth Lingen maybe have done some a little bit. She was primarily a paper maker and relief printer, but
I want to ask you two last questions because we've gone more than an hour, if you can believe it. One, we talked about this the other day, but I do want to, whenever I have the chance to ask somebody who worked in a big shop like Pace, how do young artists get to work there? And if it's by invitation or, are cold calls accepted or how that works. And the last one is, I just want to ask you about your own work now that you're retired and living in Asheville and how that's going.
the first answer is that Dick Solomon, president of Pace, and I just learned this recently, the difference between Pace editions and Pace prints.
Oh, do tell.
Well, Pace editions is like the father of Pace prints. And I don't know what that means. I just read that. Jacob Lewis, who is president of Pace Prints, and Dick Solomon is president of Pace Editions. Jacob came to us right out of college some years ago, worked as an intern one summer, and found himself president of Pace. Hey, he knows how to work it, and he's he's a good guy. He knows what he's doing. He would not have made a good printer though. So we
Sorry,
never
Jacob.
entertained that idea. How those jobs overlap or interact, I don't know. But Dick is still the president of the Pace Editions.
But is Jacob, as the president of Pace Prints, is he the person who's inviting artists in, or is Dick still in charge of the sort of roster of artists?
The kind of artists that we were working with before, about the time Jacob started working at the gallery and with Kristen Hemming and Jeff Bergman uptown, we were working more with the bigger name artists, let's say, and older artists, I should say, I guess. And then that sort of slowly transformed itself with Jacob's influence to younger artists. And you see a lot more younger artists and fewer of the dines and close.
And I think that's happening across the board. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who've said, not said, but I mean, like at ULAE, for instance, they're bringing in younger artists because, I mean, you can only maintain a shop on the backs of Jasper Johns for so long,
Mm-hmm.
At some point we have to let go of that hierarchy of the big people who brought the boom back in the 60s and start the next generation going. So it's I think we're at a tipping point really of how these shops are going to transition into a new, I don't know, way of working.
Well, it's a progressive scene now, right?
Yeah.
Politically, art-wise,
Well.
things are changing.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
There's one other artist I would want to mention that I had a great experience with, and that's Robert Mangold. We did a lot of prints together over the years. He worked at Crown Point for a long time. I always appreciated being able to work with him because in our imagery, our interest in art, I think they sort of overlapped a little bit too. And that leads into my work. I started making prints primarily about the time of 2000 and that experience and thinking that, well, I haven't been doing anything for a long time. I wanted to be an artist. I got to start sometime. I worked at Pace and nights and weekends on my own stuff. I've had a real affinity for minimalist kind of work. And the first series of prints I did, I called it the homage to BM for Barnett Newman. And I rode that horse for longer than I should have probably because it could go on forever, and as it did for him. In more recent years down here, I've taken a lot of proofs from those Pace times, my proofs, and cut them up and made collages with them, not having a press of my own, although I have access to a press. And I started doing collographs and colorful, more interested in color and complexity of shapes and space, object dynamic in an abstract way. I have a gallery. I'm very happy to have been able to join I think, the best gallery in town, and
Which
Momentum
is called
Gallery. Give them
what?
a plug.
That's right, Momentum Gallery, right?
And that's worked out very well. I plugging along at it.
That's great. But you really had been working. You must have had a press in Westchester in the earlier years.
I didn't. I did. Actually, I did. How'd you know? I had one in my basement. I had a press in my basement that was supposedly used in the early part of last century and by artists down in the lower west side, like Ashcan school artists. But I couldn't set it up because my basement ceiling was so low. I bought this press for like $500. Great press. Sold it for $500 10 years later. It was crazy. But I was working in the paste shop. Dick knew he allowed it, so I was working there on
Okay.
my own work.
Right. Wow.
So I had a great shop. It just wasn't mine.
When did you move out to Westchester? You were commuting for the last part of your time in New York. How long?
We moved in. Our daughter was born in '89. We moved in '91, and then our son was born in '94. So from '91 to 2015, we were living in Ossining, New York.
Ossining, that's
It was like a 45-minute commute.
Right. It changes things, like I grew up outside of New York City, as we spoke about last week. And that 45-minute commute sounds easy, but you add on getting there and getting to work from there. And it's just, it sucks away.
It kind of wears you down, I think. Although I did enjoy the train runs along the river. So I loved looking out on the river. In fact, I did a book with Amy Perkle, who's a book artist, teaches at the University of Alabama, of etchings of the river, aquatints. And I stood on the platform in Ossining, and that was my point of reference to looking one way or another, and did these prints. Anyway, that was a lot of fun. There's always something.
I know, right? There's always something. I think that probably should do it. We've been talking for an hour and a half, Bill, if you can believe it. And yeah. You thought you had nothing to say.
Well, you got me started last time, actually, which was good. You made it easy. You're good at this. Oh,
that's good. Oh, thank you. Yeah, and actually, when you're the printer in a shop, you get a printer's proof, just for the audience to know. So all of the printers, if you know any, they all have stacks and stacks and stacks of printer's proofs. And so then what do you do with them? And you came up with a really good solution for your collection.
I wanted to keep it together as a body of work, and I looked around, asked around to different places. The two schools that I attended, University of Texas was interested, and then they had to pull out. And then the University of Alabama, which surprised me, decided they wanted to acquire the whole collection. So that's where they are. So now they're available to students, and they frame a lot of them and put them around campus. So they get shown, they get out there. Otherwise, they'd be sitting in my flat files or under my bed. And, the big ones, that's where they go. But now they're being used.
But it's great because it is a mini retrospective of Pace Print's, output in the intaglio part of it anyway, Mm-hmm. Did you keep a favorite printer's proof that's, hanging above the couch upstairs in your living room?
The Book of Clouds.
Oh, did you? Okay.
That now is at the Asheville Art Museum on temporary loan. I have a handful of Dine and Close and Mangold and April Gornick, Mary Hallman.
I think I would have a hard time getting rid of the whole stack. Honestly, I would have kept a few back myself. They're your babies, right?
Yeah, well, I like seeing them on the wall too. We frame some. I have a Dine robe and a Klaus Oldenburg pencil sharpener, and a Terrell Nara that Yasu did. It's kind of cool to see them hanging with my stuff. You see, I can say I exhibited with these people.
Who replaced you?
Sarah Carpenter.
I mean, you're irreplaceable, of course.
No. Oh, please, not at all. Sarah worked with us for a number of years, maybe 4. I'm not quite sure how many, maybe longer. And she's terrific. She took over the etching area, and Justin Israel's primarily does relief and other area, and Yasu's there. And they're the 3. They may have, I think, one other printer now, but I think it's a small group. It never was big, but at one time we had, I think, maybe 7 printers, which was a lot for us.
Yeah, it is a lot. Although when I was talking to Chris Santa Maria about Gemini and how many printers are there when they're, going full bore on, Sarah in this corner and whoever else in the other corner, he said that they sometimes have 25 printers in there.
No, that doesn't surprise me.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, our shop wasn't made to accommodate. It was never that big. And being in the city, space is money.
Real estate.
We had a nice space. We've seen it. What we did have most of the time was an intern program. So we had interns who were very, very helpful on a lot of stuff. Besides just cleaning up and stuff, they would get things to, projects to do, things to do.
I think when I met you there the first time, there was a big Nicola Lopez project going on that, that had a lot of collage elements that were, bent in relief and glued on. And it sounded like you had a whole handful of interns working on that project.
Yeah, we did. And some of Tara's projects that required the pushing of a lot of pins into a substrate. We all would gather around a table, and she would show us how to do it, what to do. And
did she put the rubber bands on the sticky matrix, or did you guys do that?
Yeah, she was there. It was not by herself. It was at times maybe 2 or 3 others working with her doing them. That's always an issue too. For an artist involvement, do I want to stay in my studio and make something that I can sell for tens of thousands or more, hundreds of thousands, or go and make prints? And the artists who want to go and make prints as well are the ones I really admire. Like I mentioned, Bob Mangold, every year we'd have a project. James Sienna liked making prints, was very good at it.
I love James.
Chuck and Jim considered prints not on a hierarchy, but just another thing, part of his art. It's another extension of his hand. So those are the people you want to work with.
That's a great note to end on, Bill. Thank you for saying that. Because I'm like, I call myself a print evangelist, and I feel like I'm always yelling into the wind about how great prints are, and come on in, I'll get you over the speed bump, and it's like, ah.
Well, I love the entire process. It's smelly, it's dirty, but if you can't get your hands and your nose into it, then you don't belong in making prints, I guess. But it's just also the indirectness. There's so much about them that make them unique, even though they're not unique if you're printing an edition. But you know what I mean? It's a different thing.
Right. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, we're fans, clearly.
Yeah, good.
All right. Well, thanks for being here. Thank you for listening to this episode of Platemark Series 3, in which I'm interviewing luminaries from the print ecosystem. Bill Hall was my guest today, and he was a delightful subject. We had a lovely conversation. I'd like to thank him for agreeing to talk with me on the Platemark. I also need to thank Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. And as I said at the top, the images that Bill talked about are over on platemarkpodcast.com in the show notes and on the video version included within the video itself. So you should be able to see them as you're listening. I think that's it. We'll see you next time.